Alrighty, folks, welcome to Dojo Talks. Today we are talking about the ongoing drama on the existing 2024, 2025, 2026 FIDE candidates cycle. So there's been a couple stuff going on, a couple different stories we'll try to tackle just to sum up some of the bigger ones. We had top players such as Caruana, Giri, and Aronian come out and criticize the FIDE circuit, which is a big qualifier. We'll get into how the qualification works for next time around. I think that's part of it as well. Then there was players criticizing the prize fund, a lack of prize fund of the qualification cycle. And of course, we had the recent story about the hefty budget needed for the World Championship. I think we'll talk about that as well, that FIDE asked for. So a lot going on. And this is all, again, about actually I was surprised to find out the scheduled 2026 January FIDE Candidates Tournament. That's going to be the next candidates. So after this, this is May, we have an upcoming World Championship match between Gukesh and Ding Liren. That's supposed to take place in November, but players are already trying to qualify for the next candidates to determine the challenger of the winner of that match, which at this point is supposed to go in 2026.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So a blow to us personally when all this criticism came of the FIDE circuit points, right? Because we had just been saying at a general level, and these players went into much more detail than us because they live off of it. But we've been saying, hey, this is like a cool idea. They should take more spots away from maybe something like the World Cup that has 3 out of 8 spots. And this FIDE circuit seems like a pretty good idea. They don't have to run their own tournaments. They can use established tournaments and boost those tournaments in a way. And it's not open to rating manipulation in any kind of way. It doesn't depend on how you start the cycle or how you end it. It kind of matters how you do throughout. So we kind of thought it was a cool idea. And then it got kind of criticized very, very starkly by 3 of the players, who might participate in it seriously. So does either of you want to recap what the criticism was?
And maybe we should just be really clear, right? Okay, so just the transition here. So the World Championship runner-up no longer gets a spot. That's a big change.
Yeah.
Debatable. World Cup has 3. We'll continue to have 3. Debatable. Grand Swiss, we got to talk about that weird event. That was 2 and still 2. This FIDE circuit will now have 2, one for 2024, one for 2025. And then the rating spot is still there, but it's a little bit different. And maybe we get into the nuance of that. So it sounds kind of the same. I'm disappointed for a variety of reasons. Not necessarily the reasons, though, that like the top players are disappointed. I have fan concerns. But let's dive into it.
Yeah, okay, so that was, right, that was the qualification spots for the next candidates. Definitely a part of this. Okay, so going into the circuit thing, I mean, I think the idea is very good at its intention. I think it was a good idea in terms of the circuit because it does feel like it gives a lot of players a chance. And they ran it this first year. Gukesh ended up getting into the candidates because of the circuit. That ended up being a good call, if I have to, looking back on it. That spot would have gone to Fabi, I think, but he had already qualified via like World Cup, let's say. But anyways, went to the next guy. And so what they're doing for next time is they're doing 1 spot for 2024 and 1 spot for 2025. So 1 player per year. So the idea, I think, is cool because you give all these players a chance and it rewards players to playing these like big open events, and that encourages participation. It kind of feels good for like the overall chess economy. The other thing is that FIDE doesn't have to run these events themselves, so it saves them money, which was part of the criticism, I think, but I feel like we can maybe get into that. I think the main criticism that the players had, specifically Caruana and Aronian, is that the points are just not being calculated in what they think is the fairest way, or like the most sporting way. So to sum up their point of view, as far as I understand, there's too many points being awarded for open events and not enough for elite events like the candidates, Waikanze, and so on. And I feel like they kind of have a point. Like I was looking at some of the point allocations, and the way the whole circuit works is you play in at least 5 events, and then they take your top 7. And for every tournament that you do well in, you get a certain number of points. So I think winning the candidates, Gukesh got something like 26 points. If you win Tata Steel, you get something like 20, 21 points. If you win a smaller open, like a lot of people were mentioning, like Menorca Open, there was the Sardinia Festival, that's worth something like 15, 16 points. And anyway, the players are upset. They feel like not enough points are being given to the elite events. Which, fair enough, those events do seem much tougher to win than like an open event.
Yeah, but the winners of those events still get a lot of points. For better or for worse, I don't know if we want to get into the whole formula, Kostya, but like the points per event depend on the average rating of the top 8 players in the event. It doesn't matter how many lower rated players there are. So it's about like how tough is the competition for first and second and third places, etc. And basically the points go largely to being in first place and then start dropping steeply at second, third, fourth, and then they just sort of stop, depending on some rules, whether they stop at third place or fourth place or eighth place, or if there are ties, etc. And right now, whether it's good or bad, let me just say it's weighted heavily towards finishing first in any event. So if you look at like somebody finishing second or third in an open, they're not making an insane number of points compared to somebody finishing second or third at Waikanze or something like that. But where it will be maybe somewhat surprising or shocking is that if you finish first in some kind of open, you'll get more points than somebody who gets second in an elite event. Just being first has this like multiplier that's so huge. And if you look at the average rating of like a super elite tournament, it'll be 2740, 2750. That would be super high nowadays with the rating deflation that's happened. And if you look at the really strong opens, they don't have a bunch of 2750 players, but the average rating of the top is going to be very close to 2700. So there's sort of like a differential in rating, which doesn't come out that big on paper. But as we know, the difference between 2690 and 2740, 2745 is actually really big. It's a very big difference in class and knowledge and skills. But that difference mathematically of 50 points is not that big and gets easily trumped by finishing first versus finishing second or third.
Before we get into all the points, which I totally get, I wanted to say what I really don't like about the FIDE circuit. It's very hard as a fan to follow who's winning the FIDE circuit and what the results mean. So, for example, if I want to have a sense of who's winning the battle for the circuit, I have to look at a tweet from Chess Numbers who's got like statistical odds on the various people and their points. Because as a fan, it's just I just can't follow it. I don't think other people can too, and I'm a pretty intense fan. So what was so great about the candidates tournament is we had an event where it was very clear what was going to happen to the person winning the event. For all these FIDE circuit events, we have no idea. It might mean something, it might not. Totally unclear, right? That person who won the event might get in by rating. They might get in by a different way. It's totally unclear. So what I think the lesson from the candidates tournament is that you need to have a clear set of a tournament. Like somebody wins a tournament, they get a spot, right? And it shouldn't be some rando thing like the World Cup or the Swiss. It should be like an elite event that you have to qualify in. Like there should be a qualification into that event. And then again, we'd be watching those events. We'd be like, oh, can this young kid get into the event where he has a chance to qualify? That's the kind of thing I want. And the FIDE circuit, as a fan, It doesn't work. And what Fabi and Anish and all these people are complaining about is they're complaining about like, oh, it might be a little bit unfair that the Open's worth more, yada, yada. But ultimately, it's about the fans, right? And the fans want a clear sense of what's going on, and the FIDE circuit just doesn't bring it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no,
Jesse,
totally
I have
agree.
to ask,
Hmm.
I have to ask if you read Greg's proposal recently. Do you see Greg Shahadi's proposal
Yeah, I
for
did. Why don't
World
you
Championship?
why don't you tell everybody about it?
Because it's very close to what you're asking for in terms of like the big feeling of it, right? Is that he wants a series of events, and each of those events, the winner qualifies for the candidates.
Yeah.
And he's got a complicated system that we don't need to go into, I think, in our show
Right.
right now about like how
Mhm.
many people in those events are qualified and how many of them are by rating and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But as far as what you're asking for, it delivers exactly that, a series of events where the winner of each event goes to the candidates.
Exactly. Right. Right.
So, yeah, I wanted to say, I mean, so like, yeah, the overall FIDE cycle feels like it definitely has some issues. So for me, the biggest is again like the three spots for the World Cup.
Yeah.
Two spots was already weird because it's like, hey, let's make the final unimportant. It was like that was their idea. Let's just
Uh-huh.
two people qualify, and the World Cup is a beautiful event, you know, and you have to qualify to get into the World Cup. So it really like it works on multiple levels, and you have huge upsets, and but it just feels like it's such a it's one event, it's one tournament. It can be a bit random, and it's like now they're giving three spots. It's like let's make the third place match the most important in the tournament. I don't know. It really kind of screws over the tournament in a way, because this spot is kind of so valuable. So that's very strange. Um,
Mhm.
and then you have like the rating spots. I think rating it like it is a very logical factor if you're a top player and you maintain your rating and you're actively playing throughout the year and you're like top three, you know, top five, like yeah, it feels like you should get a chance to qualify for the candidates based on that. Then two spots for the Grand Swiss. Yeah, it feels like a lot for like one
Mhm.
tournament. So I definitely am on board the qualification train. I feel like that's a great idea for the fans. Personally,
Mhm.
for me, what I would kind of think makes sense is to take the FIDE circuit and have that feed into a qualifier tournament. So let's say the top eight
Mhm.
from the FIDE
Right.
circuit,
Right.
they get into a tournament and then they have to play a knockout or something to get into the candidate, something like that. So
Exactly.
then
Yeah.
a lot of players get a chance, and then it's still decided by their battles against each other and not who can score better in a December Open. Because I feel like that's going to be kind of the problem with the FIDE circuit this year. Like it was
Mhm.
last year, like it wasn't clear who's winning until the very end. Gukesh is playing a last minute event in India. Others are playing like last minute events in like Spain and like all over the world. And I don't think anyone really liked that. I think that left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. This just like end of year scramble because it's like, what's the point if it's all just gonna come down to this December chaos? But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to address a little criticism to both the World Cup and the Grand Swiss is that those have the potential, they will produce random people coming into the World Championship. The World Cup, by the way, just put in historical context, dates back to the time in the late 90s when Kasparov jumped ship and FIDE created a super lame world championship system. We've argued about that on the show. I don't think those champions are real champions. And what happened there too is you had random people winning, and we had then random world champions in the late 90s, and they've just kept that. That's an artifact of that time, that what this World Cup is, where you have these short matches and then it goes to, quick playoffs and stuff. Totally random events can happen, and
Yeah.
that's of course how Abbasov got in. And as we all the only thing we knew predicted correctly across the board was that Abbasov was going to get nailed, and the kid got nailed. And really, a large part of the tournament that was decided on who beat him and who drew him. It was a huge part of the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So huge problem with the World Cup. And the Grand Swiss honestly feels a little similar to me, like 144 people or something, all kinds of randomness. Whereas an event like the candidates, right, produces something a lot more tense, and you realize like, oh, the winner of this event probably really deserves to go. Whereas the winner of the World Cup or Grand Swiss, you never know what's going to happen.
Can I distinguish a little bit? The Grand Swiss has produced better qualifiers than the World Cup. It's less random because you can't just draw 2 games and then beat somebody in blitz chess.
Right.
Like it's all classical and there's a ton of good players and the candidates it's produced have been quite good.
Still, it's 144 people let loose in a Swiss.
There's definitely randomness, but it's like randomness among deserving people, right? It's like you've got some real heavy hitters on the top couple boards at the end. Yeah.
I like the Grand Swiss. I think Grand Swiss makes sense.
It's not going to give you a qualifier that determines things the way Abasov might have this time.
Yeah. 2 spots, though, might feel like a lot for one event.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like ideally it's just like, you get 8 spots, 1 from each source. What do you guys think about them taking the spot away from the loser of the match? Because to me, that's quite dramatic. It makes sense.
I'm okay with it.
But I don't know if I would have done it.
I don't have a super strong opinion one way or another. Like it doesn't outrage me that they used to, but they also don't need to keep that player in. So
one thing I think put in historical context is kind of interesting is that way back in the day, if somebody lost, they had the right of a rematch. And in a way, what this slot has been is the historical result of that, a melody that keeps playing in the band. And in a way, it's not terrible, but I think honestly, it was like Nepo always being there. It's like if someone at FIDE was like, this is no good. Let's get rid of Nepo, man. So that's going on with that one. Is it fair? I don't know. But anyways, it does break with history. I think that's one of the interesting things about it. And that thing where the person who was defeated, the world champion was defeated, had the right of return match. That was, of course, always very strange. That's how we get like Botvinnik being world champion forever. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess well, with the circuit, I guess the big thing is like you got to balance a bit how much you want to scientifically, mathematically find the absolute best player in the world versus how much you want to create like a fun sport for the fans. And I feel like you don't want too much of one or the other because one is just too long and possibly boring, and then the other is too random and dissatisfying. And so it's just all about finding that balance.
There's also questions of how much do you want it to cost? What percentage of the year's calendar do you want it to take up? Right? And how much does it matter or not matter to you to make it sort of open? Right? That there's some qualification to qualification, that it's sort of democratic versus selected.
Yeah.
Because if you just ran a bunch of round robins, each of which picked a candidate, and to the round robins, you just invited the top 10 players by rating, then anybody outside the top 10 would have to wait another 2 years to get into the top 10 before trying to compete for the world championships.
Let me add a detail that I think is important to just mention for people out there. So this is about the highest rated spot. It's different this time. So this will be for the player ranked first. So at the moment, let's just assume it's Carlsen and Dude declines. If the player withdraws, i.e. Carlsen, the qualification spot shall be awarded to the second highest rated player. Then, if the second highest rated player has already qualified, which in this case, in the last couple of years, that would have been somebody like Fabi, and Fabi already qualified anyway. So then the most likely result will be then this final line, that if the second highest rated player has already qualified, the qualification spot will be redirected to the FIDE Circuit 2025 path. So I'm assuming that's the person in this FIDE Circuit 2025 who has the next points in line. So that's essentially saying there's a strong possibility, I would say better than 50%, that there's going to be 3 spots awarded via the FIDE Circuit. right? Which will be very murky. And for fans, it will be absolutely impossible, impossible to follow whether that's happening, and it'll be, you got to have somebody like Chess Numbers break it down for you if you really want to follow it closely. It's not going to be the situation we all had watching the candidates event where like, okay, someone's going to win or somebody's going to lose right now.
I mean, with a $9 million budget, they could put up a link to a page with chess numbers standings.
Yeah, let's talk about
Even
the budget.
even pay him $50 to send them a spreadsheet.
Yeah, the money part is the other side of this.
Yeah. But
Mhm.
that's coming up. I think we have a few more things to discuss here before
Okay.
we transition. I don't mean to
Okay, no worries.
force a transition. I wonder what you guys think of like how valid is the criticism of Fabi, Aronian, Geary, etc., that they don't want to play in these opens and that the opens aren't that good as qualifying events.
Yeah, well, actually, that's part of the topic because of the budget. Because FIDE's saving a bunch of money with this FIDE circuit, them not having to run their own qualifier events.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that was Geary's kind of main criticism. Although, okay, sometimes it's hard to tell exactly what's like serious and what's like more of a joke. But I think I think his criticism was that these top players are now forced to play opens, and they're kind of hamstrung by the prize fund of these open events. And they don't really have the luxury of picking and choosing what they can play. I do think it was cool because I checked out the FIDE circuit page and they have a list of tournaments that like qualify for the FIDE circuit. And I thought that was cool because that's like, okay, that's now a list of like, here are the important tournaments of the year that you should look at if you're
I've wanted that my
if you're a
whole
player.
life.
Yeah, so that's nice to have like just like a list of tournaments, like here are the qualifiers. But yeah, so now FIDE is presumably saving a bunch of money. They're not running like the Grand Prix, and so yeah, I guess I'm wondering what they're gonna do with that. We also had the story about like the World Championship budget, where they're asking for a ton of money. I guess my question is like, how much of this is FIDE's fault that the circuit feels, or the cycle feels, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right.
Well, and let's just say too, just stepping back before we address their fault, is like these top players like Fabi and Aroni and Anish, they're just concerned like, oh, this is so random that maybe I'm not going to get in because World Cup, that's totally random. Swiss is pretty random whether you're going to get a spot there. And so a top player, if they want to get in, for sure, it's either going to be the FIDE circuit thing or by rating. And that's only 3 spots. Only 3 spots. So yeah, their coconuts are getting touched on this. And honestly, them complaining about the FIDE circuit and is in a way besides the point. It's the real big point for them is the vast majority of spots are being decided on events that just by chance you might win or lose. You have no idea if you're going to if you're a Fabi, you have no idea how far the World Cup's going to go. That could end right away for you. You could be the best player. That still could be over for you. Yeah.
Right. But I'm a little bit okay. Part of the proof of the pudding will be in like a couple is if we could access the standings, right? Or if like a couple more months down the road we could see what the standings are and who's in the lead.
Mm-hmm.
And that would give us a sense of does that track to who we think, are good candidates right now, right? I think that right now at the top, well, I know this much. Nodirbeck is number one right now for 2024.
Yeah, I can give the current standings. We have Noterbeck
You
number
can give us the
one.
current standings? Yes.
Yeah, no, they do have a site and they do have information about the circuit. So Noterbeck is one, Arjun is number two, Gukesh is number three, and they're the clear number one, two, and three. And then you got a couple players that are close to each other, but you have people like Daniel Darda, Luke Mendonca, Hans Niemann. They're 4, 5, 6, and yeah, then the list starts getting pretty tight.
Interesting. So one, two, three, those I would have guessed, and I think we would all agree those make sense. And
Mhm.
then the list gets a little confusing. Mendonca, Darda, Neiman, they're all young players. They're all people who've won an open tournament.
By the way, it should be noted that Gukesh, I think, got 20 points for winning the candidates. So
Yeah,
winning the candidates,
Only 20.
you don't get a rematch, but you do get
you
some
get a
points.
chunk.
You get
Yeah,
a
you
little
get a
chunk.
chunk. It's like a
And
consolation piece there.
and Mendonca, by the way, he didn't win any opens actually. He won two closed events: Tata Steel Challengers and then the
Oh, the
St. Louis Spring Chess
challengers.
Classic.
Was it? It wasn't Morizzi who won the challengers? No, he got passed at the last moment by Mendonca, huh?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, Darda a little bit surprising in fourth place, but he's won a couple of open events. He's won Sardinia Open and Djerba Open as well earlier this
Okay.
year.
Nice. Okay.
And third place Tata Steel Challengers. So you got some points from that. But it's still pretty early because most players have only played like two, three, four events at most, and you get up to seven that are going to count, like your top
Right.
seven.
At the same time, they're a third of the way through the calendar year, so it's not like they're nowhere yet, right?
Yeah, a lot of tournaments coming up.
Yeah.
there'll be
Yeah.
there'll be there'll be chances.
I mean, I think it's possible that it's weighted a little bit too much towards first, second, third versus the average rating. Like they could weight the average rating of the event a little bit higher compared to the place that you finish in. But right now, I don't think the tournament really treats like opens and closes that differently. It's just a matter of like coming out on top in an event, right? And basically, what Fabi and others were complaining, I think, was like that if they finish fourth place in a really top event, they don't get many points. But they think it's super tough to, score +1 or +2 in a really high level round robin, and that's a bigger accomplishment than scoring +7 or 8 in an easier tournament,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? That's kind of their argument. Um,
And also, it really should be said that the person who's really getting screwed there's another technicality is Levon because he won the American Cup and then FIDE decided there was too many people of American nationality in that tournament so that it didn't qualify.
yeah,
Ooh. And I have a strong feeling that the organizers of the American Cup did not realize that going in, or else St. Louis would have like brought in more foreigners, you
the
know.
American Cup is always 100% U.S. Federation players. That's like
But I'm trying to
in the
say they would
description.
have changed that up if they knew that this thing was going to go down. And so Levon, like biggest, huge event to win as an older dude, and then that is worth nothing. And that, of course, there's a reasonable rule, by the way. They're trying to direct that against like some country organizing some kind of event just for, say, an Indian player or a Chinese player, kind of the way we've seen in the
Well,
past.
You
yeah,
don't
no,
even
I
need to organize one event, right? You could organize 10 events in your
Yeah.
country, not invite any foreigners, and
Uh-huh.
just by having your own players play so many tournaments that other people aren't allowed to come to, you'll qualify a bunch of your players because it's partly, just if you've got
Right,
some good
right.
players, the volume of the events they play.
Yeah.
yeah, I think it definitely right needs to kind of defend against that. But I was just reading on Twitter earlier today. I think Emil responded to Levon at some point saying that that rule was instituted because of the tournaments that Ding Liren played
Right, right.
to qualify for the candidates. But I don't know. To me, it felt a little bit unfair to compare those to like American Cup, which is just like a normally scheduled event. It's super competitive. It's
Mhm.
not designed for like one single American player to get a chance to like qualify for something, right? It's just like
Right.
a
Yeah.
fully
But they need a rule to avoid, 6 America's Cups springing up, right? And 6 India Cups, etc.
yeah.
And in this particular case, I think it really shines through that it's just like Aronian just being clouded by his own desire for his own personal situation and not a general observation. Because the America's Cup, for many reasons, shouldn't really contribute to the World Championship cycle. It's a bunch of 2-game matches, lots of draws, you know, then they break it up with rapids and blitz, or if you go into the losers or second chance bracket, even the 2 game matches are not classical time control, right?
Hmm.
So Aronian won a single game at that tournament, a single game, and he wants to like get a load of points to get him to the world championship. Sorry, dude, long past, years too late. One win, nobody cares that you won 1 game. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous, and it's sad that you're asking for points for it.
Ah, you could do the World Cup by winning just one game too, boss.
I know,
You could
which
get
is
the World
a
Cup with
problem with
winning
that event
zero
too.
games.
Yeah, that is a good point. I mean, especially this year's American Cup was there was more rapid this year than in previous years. So, yeah, I guess you could argue about whether how much of a classical event it is. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess the rule is you're allowed to have one. I think national tournament counts. I think the U.S. Championship is the one that would count for the FIDE circuit,
Yeah.
which is reasonable. Every country gets a national championship, and then they can have that count. Um, should there
And
be more? I don't know.
they can designate any one tournament. It doesn't have to be their national championship, right? So it's allowed, but it's capped. Very reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. But to me, I think that the open events counting is great. I think it's a very small adjustment that needs to be made on the points, which is they need to weight the average rating higher versus whether you finish first, second, third, fourth, etc. So that if you had an open where the average rating of the top players was 2750, great, that should count. Basically like a closed tournament, right? But right now, if you've got an open and the average rating is 2690 or 2700, you get almost as many points as in a round robin at 2750. And it just doesn't properly show that there is quite a gap there in the rating. So they just need to rate the weighting higher in their formula. But I think they're very close to something that I like, honestly. I like that it democratizes. I like that it incentivizes the opens. I think that having more top players going to the opens to try to get the world championship will be good for the opens. It'll be good for those players. The prize funds can also increase when they've got more star power there. So I think the whole thing could really boost and benefit my overall feeling.
Let me, in terms of money, let me try to express why I think money, where in a lot of ways it's all about money. So, first of all, I think the fairest path is the one that the reason it doesn't happen is because of money. So let me break it down. Back in the day, 60s, 70s, 80s, you had qualification matches. So you would have something like an interzonal. Then those top players would then play matches against each other. It was incredibly fair. And given that you're going to eventually play a world championship match, it makes sense that you should be winning matches. Great events. The problem, however, was that who's paying for these events and how are the where do they get played and who provides the prize fund? So the attempt was then by FIDE to get countries to pay for these matches, but if you had two Soviet players playing against each other, those guys weren't going to get anything. And then sometimes in the West, maybe somebody, some kind of sponsor would be interested and would pump some money into that match. Then it would, of course, be unfair to the Soviet players who never got anything anyway, that this like Western player got a little bit of money. But even those matches, it was very hard to fund. And, the whole problem is still to this day, whether you do it by matches or some kind of tournament, is how do you generate income off of the match? Why is it interesting for the sponsor? In any case, that's the fairest system, but it doesn't happen because of money. Then when we look at what this last year and then 25, 26, the cycle, in a lot of ways, it's all about money, right? The FIDE circuit, that's just them pawning it off on all the other tournaments. Then the Grand Swiss World Cup, they're like, maybe we're going to make a little bit of money off of this weird events that we have. And it's an easy way to produce a lot of people, right? But it's not fair in any way. So I think the thing to see about it is ultimately what FIDE is doing wrong has nothing to do with the points or such. It's their inability to sell it to sponsors to get money flowing into these events, which is not just great for the players because then the players have some money, but then they had some money involved, then they could have make the whole process fairer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think the money is a huge thing, and yeah, I don't know. For me, again, it kind of comes back to FIDE and just like how they own the world championship cycle, and they try to, I guess, make money off of it, but they're not great at finding, historically, real corporate sponsors. Like compared to other sports and stuff, we don't have like Nike or Reebok like sponsoring our events, which is kind of strange and sad, especially now that chess has kind of hit the mainstream and it's become very popular. There are so many people that are getting into chess, and yeah, like the president can't attend the candidates tournament, and it's like still all these like shady dealings, and yeah, I don't know. The whole cycle feels a bit random, and
There's so not just first of all, imagine you were Nike or somebody. It would be a huge problem, dude, to try to give money to FIDE just with the whole Russian connection, as that
Mm-hmm.
would be a brand liability. Or imagine even a chess.com. I definitely think it would be in their interest to put some sponsorship, label it as a chess.com thing. But again, too, you're dealing with FIDE and there's some shenanigans there. And the problem is because FIDE is so bad at raising money on their own, they're going to then try to make money. And this is the next controversy, right? They're going to try to make money off the world championship itself. They're like, we have to raise funds, and this is our way of doing it. Oh no, oh no, disaster.
yeah, let's get into that story.
Yeah, let's get into that.
So I guess they published this budget, like a call for bids for the world championship match with Gukesh and Ding Liren. And they essentially asked for something like $8.5–9 million to host the bid. Most of it, I think, was kind of unclear where it's going. It's just like a chunk of it goes to the players. I think it was like 2 million for the players, so 2 million prize fund, and then a ton of money to FIDE to organize the match, and then a cut to FIDE as well, just for the right to host the match as well. FIDE's cut, I think, I don't know, something like 10 or 15%. But then it was just like this big exorbitant amount they asked for to actually run the event. And I saw this video Emil had, like, where this interview he gave where he was trying to justify it, but yeah, I didn't quite get like it just sounds like, they got to do a bunch of like fancy stuff and got to have like a big commentary team, big production, and spend tons of money on like marketing, but it's not clear where it's going. Like a lot of that could just be going to like very, very inflated salaries, for example. And
You mean a large part of the budget
yeah.
for the World Championship? Can be going to salaries. Yeah, I tried to watch some bits of his explanation, and there was definitely parts that he left pretty vague and hand wavy, it seemed. But I think the venue is one of the biggest expenses because compared to a lot of other events, a chess world championship is going to be a month, whereas another tournament might be a week, in some other sport. But then again, he was comparing it to like the World Judo Championship or something like that, and how that costs $10 million, But I looked up the World Judo Championship and they've got like 200 participants, not two,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So you're multiplying the hotel cost by 100. So I think I got the sense like he was being a little evasive and squirrely and weaselly about where those millions of dollars were going. It didn't fully make sense to me. I understand a month is a long time, but it seemed like, let me put it this way. If you've got a budget of like 8.5, 9 million, and so basically a less than a third, a bit more than a quarter of your budget actually goes to the players, I think the players would rather you drop some of your fancy conditions and more money go to the chess players. It doesn't even have to go to the world championship. It could go to other players down the line throughout the whole qualification cycle. I mean, you're really telling me we want to blow $4-5 million on the venue being shiny? There are top 10 players who don't make that much money in a career, you know? Um, I just, it gets back to, you guys remember with the chess economy, how I told you my first calculation of the chess economy in the US when I was young was that basically the chess economy was 90% of the chess economy goes to hotels and 8% goes to airlines and 2% goes to the top chess players who are winning tournaments.
Uh-huh.
And so now when we see like millions for some fancy venue, and he cited, for example, that putting up that soundproof glass casing around the player so people can look in on them, but they can't look out or hear out, that erecting that special glass around the board cost them $500,000. It's just like, at some point, it's like, why don't you just stick them in a hotel room with webcams in all directions, right? And put an extra, $4 million into the prize funds of chess tournaments around the world.
Well, a big picture, something I want to stress is the World Championship Fund, just imagine it this way, has been basically decreasing / stagnant for decades. Put that in perspective, though, of the chess boom that's just happened, right? Chess.com has grown exponentially. David can tell us how many members they have at the moment, but it's like so huge, I can't even keep track of it. It keeps growing.
160 million?
How many?
I'm going to guess 160 million.
160 million. Okay,
Yeah.
160 million. That's been a huge growth. And chess, I'll tell you anecdotally too. I run into like dads at the soccer field. They don't know anything about me, and they're talking to me about their kid and them playing on chess.com. And so it's like this huge boom, and yet, and also, as we saw in the candidates, a huge interest in the event. But still, has somehow that has not been monetized. On a similar kind of scale, US chess has also not been able to capitalize on it, right? With the OTB not making any ground. There hasn't been some huge expansion in membership in OTB in America, and I think other countries as well. So it's like this huge opportunity, and then somehow these organizations, the national organizations, and then FIDE are unable to do anything with it. It's kind of stunning when you just step back, like, wait a second. This has been, I don't know how you want to characterize it, but I mean, I would put it as a 30-fold increase in the amount of games being played every day, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think they just like weren't really ready for the influx of new players over the last couple of years, and chess.com and other sites definitely were, and they've clearly, shown that like you can have a functioning chess economy. And FIDE, I feel like, actually, I was just reading an article that was summarizing the Emil interview, and he was saying that their like production and their broadcast is still stuck in 2011, and he's like, we need a lot of money to update it. It's like, why are you updating it from 2011? Why is that the last time it was updated? Like, what are you talking about? 2011.
I mean, they've updated every year. It's just him couching it in a way to try and explain the money, right? He's like framing like, oh, we need to like pump a lot of money into this broadcast. Um, but I mean, anybody who saw our broadcast of the Canada's tournament knows that pumping more money into a broadcast doesn't necessarily make it better,
Right.
right?
Yeah, ours was
So,
very low budget. I mean, it better be next gen what he's talking about, because I mean, otherwise, like,
Well, and
just
even
I
that
think it's gonna
that
be the
seems to
same.
be ignorant of the fact of what happened in this last candidates tournament. So much of the interest of what was being done was what we could call free media, right? It was broadcast. It wasn't just us. There was loads of people broadcasting the event in a variety of languages. It had nothing to do with the official broadcast. That meant nothing. People didn't care
Yeah.
about that. There was, and then chess.com had their own thing. There was all kinds of people having their own broadcasts. So they don't need to do a broadcast. They
Exactly. If
make
they want to
money.
spend a bunch of money on it, they don't even need to do it. They could just sell the rights to someone else, make money instead of spending money, and
Yeah.
let other people do the broadcast for them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That would help their budget.
Yeah, that would. So I looked it up. So FIDE gets 1.1 million out of 8.5,
Yeah.
and 2.5 for the players,
Yeah.
and then the rest is just like
And then the 4.9.
it's like venue costs.
Yeah. Now, FIDE doesn't only get 1.1 million. They also, I think, depending on negotiations with the hosts of the event, but they also get a percentage of, sponsorship deals, broadcast rights, etc. They've got their own version of Prima Nocte, Jesse, from the chess house that like if you buy the rights from them to
Uh-huh.
host the event, right? And then you go out and find a sponsor yourself,
Uh-huh.
FIDE will say, yes, but we get some of that sponsor's money.
Right.
Before it goes to the organizer or the players or anything, we get to have some of that, even though you found that sponsor.
I mean,
And
that's
they get a
smart,
chunk of
right? Is that not
merchandise, they get a
smart?
chunk of broadcasting, they get a chunk of ticket sales at the door. He was saying, like, well, but you have to remember, they're not just spending millions to get the event. They also have income, like they can sell tickets at the door. And he said, at the candidates, they made $170,000 in ticket sales. Okay. I mean, a little bit of a splash in the bucket when you're asking people to spend $9 million. But he said, but that was, with 400 people at the World Championship, we're going to have thousands of people. And Cigar was like, wow, how are you going to do that? That would be a first in like, chess event history, thousands of people present. And then, of course, they're spending, extra million to have a site that can accommodate all those spectators, but not making $1 million in income off of the spectators. But then also it turns out that FIDE takes part of your ticket sales.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
they might get 1,000, especially if they host it in India. I feel like there will be a ton of spectators.
They might. But I mean, Cigar knows all about chess in India, and he was like, I loved the way instead of saying like BS to Emil, he had such a great way of being like, but Emil, I don't understand that, or how could that be? Or wow, Emil, that would be a first in chess history. How are we planning to get there?
yeah, yeah.
As
He's
the
got a
guys like saying,
curiosity.
oh, it's not such a bad deal to pay us 9 million for this event because you could sell $200,000 of tickets.
That we get a cut of.
And the other thing we should say is this extends this thing they have with them getting money. It extends to a lot of other features of FIDE, which are similar in my mind to US chess, namely, like they are asking money from anyone who gets if you get a title, then somebody, usually the federation, you get an IM or FM title, has to pay FIDE to process that title. That's one way they make money. Then, like if you run a tournament, you got to pay some cash. The member organizations have to pay them some money. And the net effect of this is it discourages participation in FIDE. The same way where like US Chess has an exorbitant membership fee. And it's like, well, what are you doing for us? Not that much. But both of those institutions, have an institutional drive to make money. And so by them trying to make money in this way, they're actually limiting their own growth, right? So it's very sad. One of the things you can compare it to is say chess.com, and chess.com is making some money, but anybody can play. You can play your heart out, right? It's not like anybody is denied the chance of playing. You're going to pay if you want something extra. And that's how, you get this huge membership influx. So it's almost like the nonprofit organizations have this, almost like an internal will to become consolidated and grow. And then when they grow, they end up adding more wheels on that aren't necessarily good for the people, but good for the organization, right? They add some kind of committee, the committee gets paid, or they add some other little, feature to their organization, and then those people get paid and have a little bit of power. Those people want to retain their power, and then it just continues on in this terrible cycle.
Yeah.
And so I don't really know if we should even expect from FIDE that they could improve on their situation, because that's just the way a lot of nonprofits are run.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and he justified to Cigar, he's like, look, we have to make money somehow because we've got a budget of millions and millions of dollars,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we have to make our money somewhere. And other federations charge more in like federation, in like dues and memberships and stuff like that. So we get our money by taxing, I think the two events are the Olympiad and the World Championship. They tax each for 1 million and other events for less, right? That's what we have to do to get our budget somewhere. But then you just have to ask yourself, like, what are they doing, with that money? What are all their necessary programs,
Mm-hmm.
And he says this very basic thing that like we're a nonprofit, so it's not like we're giving the money to our shareholders. But I mean, anyone who's had any experience in life knows that there are nonprofits that take in money and manage to give it to people in the nonprofit, without necessarily having a, profit per se.
Right.
So, I mean, you just wonder like, well, what is your need to have this budget? What are these programs that you're investing 16, $17 million a year in? And why are none of them paying off at any point? Why is it all year after year after year, you still have to keep taxing top players instead of providing something to them? Why don't you find sponsors and contribute money to these events? Why are you sucking money from these events for some other programs that we don't really know what their value is, but it's not being seen or felt?
Right.
What's the impact of it? Like if supposedly they're growing the game somehow with their thing and creating more fans, why is there no revenue eventually coming from that after 10, 20, 30 years that would then boost the prize funds or give back something to the events?
Well, they're not just going to come out and say that they're not doing a good job, That's not going to happen. Which is very understandable, no one wants to just do that. Like, sorry guys, we weren't able.
We apologize for how bad this episode of Dojo Talks was, and we would like to return the $5 that was donated during the show. Whoever donated it, if you could just come see us after the event.
Did you recently get mated? Well, it's time to join the ChessDojo training program. Or maybe you just enjoy this fine content. Give us some money on the Patreon. I need to keep the lights on, and with inflation, it's really hard for Kostya to be buying that avocado toast. By the way, okay, this is slightly off topic, but what I want to I'm still seething from their FIDE boost where they destroyed the rating system. And what it was really, especially as the more time passes, is it was the opportunity for FIDE to say, okay, everyone plays in our rating system. And that would just obviate the need for all these national rating systems. And then you would have solved the weird inflation problem by just including everybody, a worldwide rating system. Thank you very much. And instead they dropped the ball. And then, the consequences of this thing we're already beginning to see with the hectic inflation, and it's just going to be out of control. That's a whole nother topic, but I just wanted to mention that because it was a case of them trying to do a ad hoc little bit of scotch tape onto their problem instead of thinking bigger about the bigger picture and how the world chess economy, or whatever you want to call it, works.
Maybe they hired some consultants for that plan. Maybe that's part of where their budget went.
That's right.
Okay, well, we'll keep you folks updated on any on any new things. I mean, this is gonna play out this year and then next year as well. That's when like World Cup is happening, Grand Swiss. That's all 2025. So we still got a match to look forward to this year, and then yeah, who knows what the rating list will look like in 2025. I want to mention at the beginning of the show, but I didn't, so I'll mention it now. Folks, 3.0 training program is now out. We'll probably do a podcast at some point, maybe discussing not exactly the program, but maybe one feature, the new tests that we're very excited about. But yeah, if you haven't seen the training program in a little while, check it out, chessdojo.club. You can make a free account, and yeah, you can see what's going on. Lots of awesome changes to the training program. We recently hit 1,800 members and still going strong. So do check it out. Okay, thanks for listening. Please follow and subscribe. See you folks next time.